Board President Ted Parkinson, who's going to moderate the Q&A session.
Ted should have a chair.
Yeah.
This is very important. Here, I can sit on this. Ted can have a chair. This is a very comfortable chair.
Thanks.
And you seem extra comfy.
Ooh, look.
Wow, I can't see anybody.
Another cool thing about this chair. No.
Well, that was fascinating. I have a question, just to start out, because I can't help but think we all, people who are musicians, go to school and we learn, scales and things, and we learn certain types of music, and then some of us, keep playing that. Some of us play jazz. Some of us play improvised music. So I wondered if each of you could just say, at a certain point, where you chose to go into more of a free improvisation type of. Was there a moment, or did it just slip inexorably through?
Slip inexorably.
Into that.
Sounds like that's all like that. Yeah, I don't know. Who wants to go first? Do you want to go first, Jim?
You.
I want to go first. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. I think it just, I had a classical training, like most people. I went to, did all the Royal Conservatory piano theory and everything else. I studied composition. So it was a traditional training. I think I think it's from listening. That's where I get a lot of ideas from. For me, listening is probably one of the best teachers you can have. And when I was a student, I was very fortunate to have not only one of the best library collections at a university, which was University of Victoria. It had an amazing record collection. I'm sure they still do. I also had colleagues who also had amazing record collections. So I was exposed to a lot of really interesting music. And the more you listen, the more you learn. And the more you hear. And the more you hear what you like, and you hear what you want to create. So I think that's sort of where it comes from for me. A lot of it's from listening and just having colleagues who are also interested in a lot of different kinds of music. And I think you kind of find people like that as you're going through your career or, wherever you end up. I was in Europe for a couple of years, and I also met, lots of people with just, the kind of music I never heard before, and they played music in a way that I never heard before. And it just really opens your whole kind of world up, which is probably the best thing, best education, I guess, you can have in one respect, is just listening.
Great.
So for me, I had a very similar background to Allison. I was classically trained. I did a bachelor's and master's degree in performance. But I wasn't really interested in improvisation till fairly late, actually. And Joe, I don't know if you remember this, but the very first improv performance, public performance I ever did was with you.
Here?
No, not here, in Toronto, at the Old Array Music Studio. You don't remember, but I swear. Wow. My very
I left over
first.
daily?
Yeah.
Oh. I vaguely do remember.
So anyways, but leading up to that, I part of my interest in improvisation actually comes from my instrument. So you may or may not know, but the bass clarinet is a pretty modern instrument in terms of classical instruments. I hate to say that most universities in Canada still will not allow a student to study bass clarinet as their major instrument, and the only reason for that is because there's no classical music written for it. It's too new. So the first solo piece for my instrument wasn't written until the 1930s. It was used in orchestral music quite a bit before that, but because of that, my performance training, I think, was quite different than most people, because I say I'm classically trained, but I almost don't count the classical pieces I had to learn because they're just transcriptions. So I would play cello pieces that were badly transcribed for my instrument, and then I would get reprimanded in recitals that, oh, your Baroque technique is needs some work. Well, of course it does. Like, my instrument didn't play in the Baroque, and so that sort of thing really irritated me, and it really bothered me. And I remember the moment when I wanted to do improv. When I was doing my master's in Calgary, we had a ensemble called I think it was just called the New Music Ensemble, but my ensemble director had us do free improv every single week, and it was my first exposure to it, and I really sucked at it. I wasn't good at all, and I found it so intimidating, and I had convinced myself that I would never be an improviser, never be a good improviser. But at the same time, I was so intrigued by it because I loved that I could show up to this class and just be myself and just play whatever I wanted to, and no one was going to say, like, oh, your Baroque technique is not very good, and you played a wrong note there, so we're deducting some points off. And I loved the fact that I didn't have to worry about that kind of thing. And then over time, I just fell in love with it and decided that I really wanted to get better at it and focus on it. So I went to Montreal and studied with Laurie Friedman for a year, and then shortly after that I moved to Toronto and I played with you at that show. But I don't remember.
I totally remember
I don't
that.
think I was very good, so it was probably pretty forgettable.
We were playing there every week for like 7 years. It's not my fault. Right on. I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, I'm doing it again.
Okay, my answer to this is I don't think I ever chose to do this as a singular path. There was a moment though when I chose to investigate it because I sucked at it. So I grew up, I had a really intense musical education. I started playing the drums when I was like 11, and by the time I was 13 I was playing like 4 and 5 paying gigs a week with a working jazz ensemble in Guelph, and also playing in my friends' punk rock bands. But by the time I hit university, I had a lot of experience playing a really broad range of jazz music. And then I got to university, and it was like, jazz is this little thing. And so I really struggled to study this little path rather than this big path. And then I got to the end of university, and I went to the Banff Center. And around that time, there was a cool record store around the corner from my house in Toronto, and they started to get these Winter and Winter records in, which I bought because the covers were so beautiful. And then I happened to also fall in love with the music on them, but it was really the covers that
I think they meant to do that, actually.
I'm sure they meant to do that. But what happened was I bought a few of those records, totally blew my mind, and then some of the musicians on those records were in Banff. And what I realized was that the music that these people were playing was like, they would be rocking out, and then they would be swinging their asses off, and then they would be playing this kind of chamber music-y stuff. And then there would be this other space where they were just improvising. And I was trying to get into that, but I couldn't do this other thing. And so I dedicated myself to trying to figure out how to do this thing. And then for a while, nobody wanted to hire me to do anything else. They wanted me to be that guy who makes the weird noises on the drums. So years later, like a few years ago, I heard somebody whisper in the corner, like, "Wow, Joe can actually like play the drums." So hopefully people, yeah. But this for me was like one of the pieces of kind of what I thought about as my music, So hopefully I didn't choose it again. I hope I didn't choose it as a singular path, but I did choose to go. I need to figure out how to do that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my intro question to get everybody warmed up. So, does anyone? Okay, who would like to ask a question now? Got somebody yes at the back.
I have a question for Joe. You said that you hate 95% of drum solos.
Uh-oh.
What about the 5%? What do you? I want to know what you like. What you look for in drum solos.
So what I like is conversation. What I like is, can I tell you my theory? Look, I think a lot of drummers think that you can hear the difference between their two hands. So if I do this, or I do this, Or I do 2 with my right hand and 2 with my left hand. You only heard bop, 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 bop. But drummers get really hip and they do all this stuff. And they think you can hear it and they think you can tell the difference because they can see the difference and they put a lot of work into figuring all that stuff out. But as a listener, all you're hearing is bop, 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 bop. And so, like, I'm talking specifically like in the jazz tradition. Just a lot of that stuff is just like, oh God, really? Get on. Like, I really love what drummers do when they're like, they're laying down a carpet for other people to play on, and then like sticking stuff out of the carpet for you to trip over and getting up and you know what I mean? Like, I love the interaction part. Solo-wise, I love people who can simulate that same kind of interaction, but it's all coming from them. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I want to hear an example of that, because I've been struggling all evening to kind of understand your framing of this kind of conversation. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm not really sure what a solo conversation looks like. So lay it down.
What it looks like?
Yeah, what does it sound like?
You want me to play again?
Yes. Just play.
Okay. You know, I did that for like 20 minutes. Conversation. Okay, so like, I started out that solo with this. Which is a 5/4 polyrhythm that I really like because it kind of reminds me of the windshield washers on the bus. You know what I mean? And I came back, and so I was imagining those 2 windshield wipers in conversation with each other, right? And so I started. When the first time I did it very strictly. The next time I did it, I changed it up a little bit. But there's this windshield wiper and there's this windshield wiper, and they're kind of talking on the front of the bus, right? The next time I closed this one, and I imagined them a little bit more in trouble, kind of. Maybe the windshield has some ice on it, and they're kind of having a little bit more trouble moving. And so I kind of had this. Right? So there's a conversation, and then every time I came back to that thing, I was trying to think about it in a slightly different way. So there's a lot of conversation going on. First of all, that piece of material is conversing with itself through time. But then it's conversing with this sound. Maybe the polyrhythm thing happens here instead. And so it's moved and it's happening in a different space, but it's the same idea. I'm using the word conversation kind of loosely. It's not literal, you're right? But that's kind of how I'm thinking about it in my head. There's interaction, there's stuff, there are things to trip over, there are people can, bits of material, sound material can get angry at other bits and tell them off. I don't know, just stuff. Is that helpful?
It is.
Okay. Now you have to play again.
Okay, at the back.
I am new to this, so hopefully you can appreciate it from my opinion. Traditional music has all these rules. So, as a new person to this, when does sounds are just sounds, and when do sounds become music? Like I'm having a hard time seeing the music from a traditional point of view from what I've heard tonight. Like I understand where Joe's coming from, but I'm not in Joe's head. I'm seeing what he's trying to produce, but I don't understand how he's fitting that sound to what he's thinking, and how that's supposed to project to me, the audience.
Maybe Allison, being a composer.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question because it brings up the whole notion of what is music, right? I mean, which is a big question. And I think I was thinking about this the other day, the very first person to actually try to distinguish or describe, I guess, in words, the difference between noise and music was Helmholtz. What's his first name? Helmholtz, who wrote on sensation on the sensation of tone around the turn of the last century. But it wasn't very good, and not everybody agreed with him. So it was, but it did start this conversation about what's a noise, what's a sound, and how does it all become music? And I think over the course of history, we've seen a lot of different kinds of music, different ways of producing sound. I guess the concept generally is from about maybe the 40s or 50s in the 20th century, when sound or music became organized sound, and that's really all it is. It's just an organization of the sound. When you hear sound in a space, it's making a certain shape. So we start playing, we stop playing, and that in itself, that makes a certain shape to something, which is in effect a kind of music, because it's putting these sounds together. It's not the same way that you would relate a traditional melody and accompaniment, or maybe a symphony. But in a sense, the same kind of things are going on. You're still making relationships. Your ears are making relationships with the sounds, and they're putting them in this space of time that you're hearing them in. So I guess that's how I think of it. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I think of what we do together. That we're expressing our sounds together, and we're making the shape of a piece that way. So how they relate to each other, we decide at the moment how they're going to relate, and how they don't relate sometimes. It just becomes a part of that sort of composition of sounds then. How's that?
That's good.
Yeah, it's fine.
I wanted to say one thing, because
I mean, you can disagree with me.
Jeff O'Reilly is a bass clarinet player who was here a few years ago, and he gave a workshop that I went to. And it was interesting because a whole bunch of people came, and they all had different levels of musicianship. Mm-hmm. And I thought I would bring my guitar just for the heck of it. And, he made us work, right? It wasn't like you could just go and hang out and play anything. We did exercises, and in the space of an afternoon, we worked harder than a lot of people thought we probably would. And by the end of it, we actually had a piece that he said, worked pretty well. So it was a lot of listening, like you're saying, listening to people and playing, and not playing too much. And so it was a very interesting from that workshop perspective. So
I think in any musical situation, it's social, right? I mean, whether it's a string quartet or us three, or a group like you and Jeff, you are sitting in a situation together and doing something together. You're listening to each other. You're playing together. There's a certain socialness to the whole thing, and that's not different in a symphony or whatever. It's just a different kind of hierarchy, I guess.
yeah. Yes, question in the middle.
I have a question for, is it Alice or Allison?
Oh, Allison, yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, Alice, she's the girl in Wonderland. I'm Allison.
But, so do you, compose, the stuff that you, compose, do you actually compose pieces where you incorporate graphic notation that incorporates improvised music?
I have,
Stuff that
yeah.
you improvise, you just, do it without writing it down?
Well, I've done different kinds of scores. I think the main difference, what you're talking about, is whether you have a score or not, right? Yeah. So whether you're saying, let's play together, let's improvise, I think that's very different than saying, let's look at this, and this notation is very loose, so we're going to look at a kind of drawing or sketch that means certain things. That's a different way of looking at a composition. as opposed to just saying, okay, we're going to improvise. And I think it's just a different it's a different structure. So when you look at a graphic score, there's something more specific there. And when you're saying, let's improvise together, it's, again, you're doing it with each other. You know what instruments we play, but we don't always know. There's no kind of saying, okay, well, let's play this at the beginning and this in the middle and this at the end, or when I do this, it means that. There's no, that kind of structure isn't there. So the structure is more amorphous. It's like really just playing off each other.
And what I was wondering, like, what do you do more of? Do you do more of, like, where you improvise together, or do you actually spend time looking at graphics scores and stuff, and composing graphics scores? What do you feel like you enjoy the most?
Well, I like all of it, actually. I do write chamber music still. I actually have a bunch of instructional pieces now that I've been working with different groups on, and I love playing. So the thing, though, is I found, though, that when you're doing a lot of playing, it's not conducive to writing. So sometimes you have to stop playing just so you can get back to writing. And writing is a very different activity than performing. So it's and they're not very, like, you have to do one or the other. That's what I found anyway. So. Does that answer your question? I hope. Yeah.
Yes?
I liked the way you, Joe, how you talked about how you equated how you were going to do solo with going for a walk, and how you might have some ideas that you want to touch on. So I was hoping if each of you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that point. And how do you decide? So Kathryn, for instance, you have one instrument. Allison, Joe, you guys have a slew of things you can decide. So do you think about what you're going to make up beforehand, or do you just grab whatever's closest to the door and figure out once you get there what you're going to do, or somewhere in between?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's both. It really depends on the situation, and actually tonight was both. So I knew that I had in my head that I was going to do 3 shortish pieces to make up the 20 minutes, and I knew that the very first piece I wanted to be based on multiphonics. So I had that as a starting point. And then other than that, it was just sort of looking at my timer and realizing when I should end one piece and when I should start another. But that was it. But sometimes I have more of a structure when I do a longer recital. I tend to map things out a bit more. But usually when I say map things out, I just mean starting points. So I just mean that maybe I'll start one that's based on multiphonics, and maybe later in the program I'll do a piece that's very rhythmic, or that starts very fast, or has a very melancholy sound. I usually don't. It's very rare that I get any more specific than that. And the last 2 pieces, like I said, I just knew that I was going to do 2 others, and I knew approximately when I had to start them.
Can I add a follow-up? If you could just all answer that as well. Do you find it easier or harder, or no difference, to know you've got a, say, 20-minute time limit after you've done all that planning, or sort of not planning?
That's a hard question. Again, it's kind of both, and it just depends on how things are going. Tonight, I felt that the 20-minute time limit was a little strange, because my last piece, I felt like it should have ended. I kind of wanted to end it about a minute before I did, but I have to fill up that 20 minutes. So I kept it going, and I was like, well, I'm not going to play a 1-minute piece, and I really got wrapped up in the time tonight, which I normally don't, because I just had it in my head. It's like we all have 20 minutes. So I think in some ways it's maybe better if you don't have that such a strict time constraint. I think I probably would have approached the last piece at least a little bit differently.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
So how do you decide, how much planning ahead do you do?
Yeah,
what do you decide what you're going to bring?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do you find having a structured time limit frustrating or liberating, or neither?
No, I probably, when I was, Joe and I were actually talking about this before we started, because when I play solo, I think a lot more about what I'm going to do beforehand than when I'm playing with others, and it's mostly because I'm thinking more, kind of trying to think more of, I guess. Compositionally, like there's some things that I want to put together, or there's some sounds that I want to explore, and this is how I want it to go. And it doesn't always go how I want it to, but sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it's not. It's just a way of making, I guess, for myself, making a continuity out of what I'm doing. And I'm never sure how long it's going to be, or how short it might be. But I might have a rough idea. But when I'm playing with other people, it's more, I don't usually have a plan. It also depends on who I'm playing with, because sometimes you can think of as a group of musicians as a kind of, it's already a parameter, right? So we have a parameter with drums and bass clarinet and my instruments. So how can I work with bass clarinet and drums in this situation, as opposed to working with a guitar player and a drummer, or a guitar player and somebody playing analog synth. I would just think about those things, and also what those people do when they improvise a little bit as well. So you can also, it's possible to think about any of those situations compositionally, I guess, is my point, just as a pure parameter kind of thing. So I better stop.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that I have struggled the most with is that a horn player puts a horn in their mouth, and they generate sound by blowing into the mouthpiece and moving their fingers around. So anything that they do is physically very tiny, and they can find a world in that. But I kind of then have 100 different worlds, right? And so yeah, your question, do you know what your? So I think about it in terms of implements. So what am I gonna use on what to do what? And then I get into, well, what if the drum is actually the implement, and my brain goes off on another path. But to answer the simple question of, do you know what you're going to do? You're kind of saying, do you know what you're going to do when you pick that thing up, or do you pick it up and then find something? Is that fair?
Or do you I haven't played my
Bass clarinet.
brass bowl in a long time. I feel like playing the brass bowl today.
Yeah, it's kind of both. So sometimes I feel like I need to trip myself, and so I'll just reach for something and see what happens. And sometimes I hear a very specific sound and I know where it is. And sometimes I hear a very specific sound and I know exactly where it is, and then I try and play it and I screw up. And I've accidentally tripped myself up. So there's a lot of parameters, right? It's like there's purpose and intention, and then there's there's accident, and there's looking for accident, and then there's accepting accident when it happens when you weren't looking for it. So it's kind of all of those things. And time is really weird in music for me. Sometimes I played for an hour and it felt like about 30 seconds, and sometimes I played for 30 seconds and it felt like an hour. And but apparently I talked and played for 21 minutes or
You were
something.
bang on.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how I did that, because I was thinking that was maybe 8. For some reason in my head that felt like 8, and I was worried people were gonna go, "You didn't play long enough." Yeah, time makes no sense. I have no idea. So had I had a clock, that would have been one thing. But I
Would that have
didn't.
been worse? Would that have been stressful to see the clock, or would it have? Do you know?
I like the idea. Because it's I can't stop. Anthony Braxton has a 60-minute hourglass, this massive, beautiful hourglass, And he'll do concerts where it's like, all right, we're gonna play for an hour, ready? And you have to go for an hour. So if you find an ending, you just have to go, oh well, we have to keep going. Let's find something else. That I find really interesting because it kind of pushes you and forces you to like find new things. So a clock to kind of push is an interesting idea. A clock to cut you off is maybe not so fun.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, is it Phil?
Great. Oh, yes.
This is similar to the previous question. How far do you guys listen ahead or expect things when you guys are working together? And like when you guys are playing an ensemble, like when you guys are improvising and you guys have to listen to each other, right? How much of it is through expecting what's coming next and then reaching for whatever's coming next, or just listening and then acting spontaneously?
It's the spontaneous one, yeah. I think it depends. I know there's certain people that I play with in an improv context repeatedly, and I think you do get to the point where you can almost read their thoughts. Like you've played with them so often, you know them so well, you can almost anticipate what they're gonna do. But honestly, I think I prefer this context where you really have no idea what's gonna happen, what the next person's going to do. So in terms of tonight and sort of what I was responding to and how I was reacting was very much in the moment. I don't think I had any expectations of what was going to happen next.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, we have played together before in a quintet. Did some sort of very short improvisations. The violin and piano was in that as well, but not as a trio. And I think also the other thing that is nice when you don't play together very often is you get reacquainted with each other, which is nice too in a way. I mean, someone who's a player who their main focus is playing. It's really it's so much about them, you know, and what they do, the sounds that they make, all that is unique to them. And I think that you can. It's interesting for me anyway to think about that when I'm thinking about playing with others, what they do, like what kind of sounds that they do, and it's nice. It's a nice creative sort of thing to think about before you go and play with somebody. But I don't think there's any. I can never predict what we're going to do or how it's going to go, you know, dynamically or anything like that. I'm just responding and playing.
For me, I kind of like, and I kind of insist on this with my students. I kind of like being right on the edge, and the thing I say is, every single gesture you make has to be potentially the final one. So I like being kind of like, every single movement might be the ending of something, might be the ending of the whole piece, might be the ending of investigating this particular material. But I want to hear now. When I'm playing other kinds of music, you're right, you kind of hear ahead, right? But in this kind of free improvised thing, it's like literally trying to contract time and have it be really tiny. The moment is small, whereas in other kinds of music, you're trying to stretch the moment, I think. Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, just a quick question. In terms of the sounds you're creating, they don't necessarily have the same, comfort in terms of sounds that one would hear on a regular basis. So in terms of the response that you're able to create, in terms of creating an emotional response in the audience, do you feel like you have as much control in terms of kind of instilling different types of emotions given the palette of music that you're creating?
For me, I feel that I have much more control over that in this context than I do if I'm playing a piece that someone else wrote. But for me, honestly, I don't really think too much about expressing the audience's emotions or really dealing with that. For me, it's almost a very selfish thing. It's you're so focused on expressing yourself and using, your own thoughts, your own feelings, and getting that out. And I think that's why this type of music, free improvisation, is used as a therapy tool. It's what music therapists use, and I think that's why they use this type of music and not anything else. Not jazz improvisation that has a lot more structure, a lot more rules to it, or compositions where it's someone else's ideas. You're expressing someone else's thoughts. Whereas this puts it much more in your own hands, and whatever's in here and in here, just it just all comes out, and it can be incredibly therapeutic. And the interesting thing is, I think for us as performers, at least for me, that's very much how I feel it. I use this as a tool to really express myself in a much more authentic way than I can when I'm playing a composition. But music therapists almost do the opposite. So they don't really, they're not using this type of music to express themselves. They're using it to help their clients express themselves, which is totally different. And I've worked a little bit with music therapists because we have a department at Wilfrid Laurier, and every year in my class I try to get a music therapist to come in and work with the group, because it is a completely different experience. You take it out of your control, and suddenly you're using your ideas, your thoughts, your inspiration from the sounds that you're hearing to help someone else express themselves and help someone else deal with whatever they're going through. And I find that really interesting. But in terms of me tonight and how I normally approach this, it's very much expressing me, not so much expressing the audience. But having said that, I feel that the audience very much influences what I do. And they always say that when you're improvising as a soloist, you're never truly improvising as a soloist, because the audience is there and they are interacting with you. So Joe used the term conversation a bunch of times. I really feel as well tonight and every other time I've improvised as a soloist that I'm not just conversing with my own ideas, but I'm also conversing with all of you. And you may not know that you're interacting with me, but you are, and I'm sensing something from you. And every audience is going to result in me playing differently and reacting to my musical ideas differently as well.
Fascinating.
The idea of control is kind of creepy to me. The idea that I'd have some control over you and would I guess would have done some work to develop my ability to have some control over you. I care about what the audience is doing. I care that you're here. Thank you. But what I can offer, I hope what I'm doing is inviting to you. But I don't think the answer to that, I don't offer that invitation by playing what I think you want me to play. I offer that invitation by believing in what I'm doing and by genuinely loving the process that I'm going through. And I mean love in a really broad way. Love sucks sometimes, and love is completely amazing sometimes. But if I genuinely love what I'm doing and I genuinely believe in what I'm doing, then hopefully that offers an invitation and invites you into it. I hope also that if you hate it, you'll leave, or you'll say that you hate it. That's great. Please do that. But yeah, the idea that somehow in any music I'd have some control over you by playing it that's actually kind of disturbing. I'm not trying to stress your word, but I guess I am stressing your word. The idea of control is difficult.
I guess I'm thinking about maybe just kind of like Chopin, kind of putting you in kind of a sad sort of context. So you need something basic like that. There's an intent in terms of how, just in terms of how that would tend to cause people to feel so in that sense.
Right. So what's interesting about that is that's a very culturally specific thing, right?
Yeah, so it's almost like absent of culture. It's something because there's nothing to relate.
Or open to any kind of
Right.
response. And what's fascinating about that is it's kind of the same as Chopin. It's just that Chopin might have assumed that everybody thought that was sad, whereas I might feel sad about a certain sound, or I might feel tense about a certain sound, or whatever. But I'm really interested in what you feel about those things, and I'm particularly interested if you feel something completely different from me. You know. So again, not control, but like an invitation for you to hear this and respond to it the way you do. And I'd love to talk about that, yeah.
Did you have any?
Well, I think the idea of the invitation is great, but I think the concept that you're talking about is very, in some ways it's broad, because we all grew up with a certain kind of music, and music changes your consciousness. That's one thing it does. When you walk into a room and you hear a piece of music, it can immediately change your mood, and there's only one kind of art form, I guess I know, that does that so quickly. It is music, and but we're kind of inundated with certain kinds of music that are the same kind of emotions, and I think what we're trying to do is experience and express our experience with music that can offer some different kinds of emotions or different ways of feeling when you're hearing sounds. And I think that's what the invitation is for, and it's about is that that's all. Hopefully.
So it's 10:30 now, so maybe we'll take like one or two more questions, and if we have one or two more. Anybody? Well,
Only good ones.
yeah. Or we could end now, and people could come up when you're packing up, and
Can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
Before you alluded to this before, that we talked before we came out, and you were saying that you had in this particular case, or in solo situations in particular, like a kind of general plan. Can you share the general plan that you had tonight? Like, is that still in your head?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty simple. I just I had these field recordings. From when I was in the Arctic, I made some recordings with hydrophones around icebergs underwater, and they were very musical. Not that you hear it that much through these small speakers, but you can get a sense of this very subtle kind of density going on. So I wanted to do something with that texture. So one of the iPods I had was running about a 3-minute recording I had of that, and then the second iPod I had running through my filters to pick out some of the frequencies of that sound, and so basically the idea was to play with those kind of sounds, both acoustically and electronically.
Right.
So that was just the basic premise, and I was going to, the sounds are very quiet, so I had to also think about that a little bit. So that was about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's great. Great questions, great discussion, fascinating. We could probably talk till midnight, but we had a bar at the back. Thanks a lot for participating.
Thank you.